Richard Nixon made many positive contributions for the duration of his presidency, such as progressive foreign policy and advancements for environmentalists, but Watergate poisoned his presidential legacy and left its mark on other scandals that followed.
Hello, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Bethany.
Welcome to our crash course.
I'm Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon actually did many positive things during his presidency, but one wrongdoing poisoned his legacy.
When I think of Richard Nixon, the first thing that comes to mind is Watergate. I didn't know about the amount of good things he did for our country during the 70s. I wonder if people today know about Nixon's presidency prior to Watergate.
What comes to mind when I say Richard Nixon?
He's a president.
Oh, a president. Watergate?
If you had to describe Richard Nixon's presidency in one word, what?
I don't know. Conservative. Watergate?
Do you know what the Watergate scandal is about?
No, because I forgot to do my research on it, so I don't know.
Kind of, yes. He had some of his aides break into his Democratic opponents' offices to look for some information about them, and all his planning and everything was recorded on tapes, so that's how they found out about it. Well, no, that's not how they found out about it, but it was used against him.
Wow, it's unbelievable the amount of people that don't know about their own U.S. history and about Richard Nixon. Nixon's presidency is actually an interesting one to look into. Even the way he was elected was cool. He ran for president in 1964 against Johnson, only to lose, so he would run again the next presidential election in 1968. Nixon had big issues to face, like the Vietnam War. Many people didn't like the Vietnam War because they thought it was an unnecessary war. It was such a big issue that the Democratic Party was split over the ideas on how to handle the war, which led to a huge mess when it came to pick the candidate to their own convention. The Democrats ended up picking Herbert Humphrey to run for their party.
There was another candidate, George Wallace, who ran for the American Independent Party. Wallace surprised the nation when he took a notable part of the popular election. Nixon was still able to beat them both to take the presidency. Nixon took 56.1% of the electoral votes, but only 43.4% of the popular votes. Despite only taking 43.3% of the popular votes, he impressively still won.
Nixon's first goal as president was to stop the war protest. He had one of the best knowledges on foreign policy and did amazing things for the country. When Nixon was commander-in-chief, his policy was to aim to stop trying to eliminate communism and win the Cold War, but instead replace it through new initiatives directed toward the areas of cooperation.
Nixon parted with the policy of containment and rather thought that negotiations and peaceful competition would lead to strengthening of democracies. The Nixon Doctrine was implemented in 1969, which called for the United States to act within its national interest and keep all existing treaty commitments with its allies. It was created during the Vietnam War. It stated that the U.S. would honor its existing defense commitments, but in the future, other countries would have to fight their own wars without support of American troops.
In 1970, Nixon avoided another missile crisis involving a Soviet Union submarine. Nixon also became the first president to visit the People's Republic of China, where he issued the Shanghai Communique, which announced the desire for open and normal relations.
Nixon also participated in strategic arms limitation talks, also known as SALT, in 1972, as part of the effort to temper the Cold War through détente. Détente is the easing of hostility or strained relations, especially between countries. Détente for the United States was focused on relaxing tensions between the United States and its two major communist rivals, the Soviet Union and China.
The Paris Peace Accords of 1973 was signed, ending the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Richard Nixon signed the Anti-Ballistic Missile (ABM) Treaty. It calmed down tensions by curtailing the threat of nuclear weapons between the world's two superpowers. Richard Nixon helped establish new relationship in the Middle East, eliminating Soviet dominance. Nixon supported Israel with massive aid in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War. Prime Minister Golda Meir later said his actions saved her country.
Richard Nixon was also a huge leader and advocate for environmentalism. The public opinion of the environment was drastically changed after the public outcry of Rachel Carson and her publishment of Silent Spring. Carson was a college graduate of Pennsylvania College for Women in 1925. She was going to pursue writing, but changed her major to biology. She released Silent Spring in 1962, and in it, she tackled the harmful effects of the aerial spray of DDT. She emphasized that chemicals that are used to kill insects also kill birds, and the chemicals travel all the way through the food chain. The publishment of Silent Spring led to the creation of Earth Day.
Earth Day was first on April 22nd, 1970, where 20 million Americans performed in demonstrations for the environment. With all this craze for the environment, it led to the United States to call upon Nixon to act. The National Environmental Policy of 1969 was passed, and it was huge for being one of the first laws made to protect the environment. It also outlined a formal doctrine of environmental policies and required federal agencies to establish and submit statements about the environment, such as the Presidential Council on Environment with the Executive Office.
Nixon was also involved in creating the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, which is responsible for writing and enforcing rules over human health and the health of the environment. One rule signed by Nixon was the Clean Air Act extension of 1970 on December 31st. It becomes the most significant air pollution control bill by requiring the EPA to enforce regulations to protect people from airborne pollution, specifically sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, and lead. Despite all of the good lasting results that came from the decisions made during Nixon's presidency, the only thing he is remembered by is his scandal with Watergate.
Oh, it's time for the pow tune?
They were small-town reporters until... Man, Wood, we have another stupid assignment. I hope it isn't Gloria who left her credit card at bingo night again and someone stole her identity. No, it's not, but that was a good one. It's a case on Watergate. Nobody knows what it is, so we have to figure it out. I hate trying to figure it out. It always turns out to be something stupid. I wish that one time we got something that actually matters. I didn't do all that law school to keep track of old lady's credit cards. Doesn't she have one of those caretaker people to take track of her stuff? Hey, knuckleheads, you have a case to work on. Okay, boss. The two guys broke into DNC office at Watergate complex, so let's get to work. Man, I hope it's not another robbery. I know, but if you want to make it to the big time, you have to do little cases first.
Created using Powtoon.
On June 17, 1972, the police arrested 5 burglars at the Democratic National Committee office located in the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C., for attempting to wiretap conversations and steal secret documents. 4 of the men were arrested were active in the CIA, assisting in activities against Cuban leader Fidel Castro. The 5th burglar arrested, James W. McCord Jr., was given the main job of helping Nixon be reelected for a second term.
The arrest was reported in the next morning's Washington Post newspaper in an article written by Alfred E. Lewis, Carl Bernstein, and Bob Woodward. Bernstein and Woodward, as young, inexperienced authors, assisted the FBI in identifying 2 co-conspirators in the burglary. The 2 men were E. Howard Hunt Jr., a former high-rank CIA officer who was appointed to the White House staff, and G. Gordon Liddy, a former CIA officer who was working as a counsel for CREEP, or the Council to Re-elect the President. However, when the break-in occurred, it was found that Liddy was overseeing an uncompleted attempt to break into the headquarters of George McGovern, the Democratic nominee in the 1972 election. Nixon's press secretary, Ron Ziegler, told the public that the Nixon had no comment on what he referred to as a third-rate burglary attempt. The co-conspirators involved destroyed the evidence from the burglary. They were ordered to destroy all burglary equipment along with several stashes of $100 bills. The deputy director of CREEP was also ordered to burn transcripts of wiretaps and the break-in.
Nixon, his chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, and Charles Colson spread alibis in a lax attempt to prove their innocence. Also, the White House secretly, of course, had arranged to have Hunt, as part of a plan for the burglars, to take the fall for the crime. This plan fell through. On June 23, 1972, Nixon, through channels, ordered the FBI to slow down its investigation. The order revealed what came to be known as the Nixon tapes. These tapes were Nixon's own secret recordings of his phone calls and conversations that took place in the Oval Office. These tapes also became known as the smoking gun or smoking gun tapes, which proved that the President Nixon had been part of a large criminal cover-up. from the beginning due to an area of tape that had been tampered.
Newspapers also that were sympathetic to Nixon's cause rarely mentioned Watergate in a suggestive act of loyalty. In an election eve poll, respondents shockingly said that they still trusted Nixon more than Democratic candidate McGovern. Nixon was re-elected for a second term in a historic landslide.
The trial of the 5 burglars and 2 accomplices in federal court took place less than 2 weeks before Nixon's inauguration. Narrow indictment on charges of burglary, conspiracy, and violation of federal wiretapping itself spoke the success of the White House in containing the scandal. The presiding judge, John J. Sirica, constantly badgered defendants and witnesses on matters not covered in the indictment. Most of these included the financial and institutional involvement of the White House in re-election campaign. All defendants pleaded guilty besides Liddy and McCord, who were later convicted at the end of January. On December 7, 1973, investigators found that an 18.5-minute portion of one of the recorded tapes had been erased. Rosemary Woods, Nixon's longtime personal secretary, said she had accidentally erased the tape by pushing the wrong pedal on her tape player while answering the phone. This made Nixon look even more guilty as the trial ran on, again known as the smoking gun tape. Then for Nixon came his most stressful year, 1974. On April 30th, the White House released more than 1,200 pages of edited transcripts of the Nixon tapes to the House of Judiciary Committee, but the committee insisted the tapes themselves must be turned over. Then, on July 24th, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that Nixon must turn over the tape recordings of 64 White House conversations, rejecting the president's claim of executive privilege.
On July 27th, the House of Judiciary Committee passed the first of 3 articles of impeachment, charging obstruction of justice. Then, finally, on August 8th of 1974, Richard Nixon became the first U.S. president to resign. Vice President Gerald R. Ford assumed the country's highest office and would later pardon Nixon of all charges related to
The Suffix Gate will forever be put on the end of scandals because of Watergate, such as the Deflategate, where Tom Brady was suspended by the NFL for 4 games because he was accused of deflating footballs before the playoff game. The incident was not called the Deflate Hilton or the Deflate Marriott. It was called Deflategate, using the suffix gate to insinuate a scandal. Other examples of gate being used at the end of scandals are Rathergate in 2004, which formed memos on George W. Bush's military record.
Another is the Billy Gate in 1980, when Jimmy Carter's brother Billy illegally represented the Libyan government as a foreign agent. Also, the Debate Gate of 1980 and the Fan Gate in 2014. It's so crazy to think about the impact left on the country from one president's misconduct in office.
Nixon's presidency will forever be poisoned by the Watergate scandal, and that is all that will be remembered when Nixon will be taught to future generations.
And I'm Bethany.
Don't record this. Okay, this is run through.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Stephanie,
And I'm Bethany.
and this is our Steph and Beth crash course on Richard Nixon. He ran for president in 1964 against Johnson to lose, so he would run in the next presidential election.
So I'm starting over, I assume.
Nixon avoided a second bad missile crisis involving a Soviet Union submarine. Nixon also became the first president to visit the Republic Peoples of China. That was the wrong country.
As part of the effort to temper the Cold War through detonate. Detonate is the easy
Or Golda Meir. I'm good.
You sure?
Détente. Détente.
They don't.
Daytime 1973 was signed, ending the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Richard Nixon signed the ballistic during the Yom Kippur War. Prime Minister.
I just want to throw out there also, you said ABA, not ABM.
Okay.
So you know.
Great.
This is not amateur hour, people.
Calm down, Bethany. the nation's lakes, streams, rivers, and wetlands.